Chimiquich.
Is that on then?
Yeah.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
So what
I'm
happened
sorry.
nationwide? Henry Dawes was a senator from Pennsylvania. He passed what was called the Dawes Act or the General Allotment Act in 1887. What it was, Native people possessed 140 million acres nationwide of tribal trust land. What's ironic about that is the land is held in title by the United States government. And so they're the owner, even though it's called Indian land. And then the tribes have what's called the equitable use right, real estate law term, meaning the right to use it with the permission of the owner. So they wanted us to stop being communal, sharing, tribal, food gathering, hunter people, and to settle down and get a homestead.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why the allotments were 80 and 80 equals 160, which was a homestead in that period of time. So the long and short of it, for 1887, there's 140 million acres of tribal trust land nationwide. So then they apply the Dawes Act. Every man, woman, and child got 160 acres, 80 and 80. By 1934, June 18th, was the passage of the Indian Reorganization Act. That stopped allotment. And that froze everything into trust in perpetuity as of June 18th, 1934. But by that time, Native people had lost 90 million acres of that tribal trust land. And what they were doing, it was to be held in trust for 25 years. Then after a 25-year period, if they could certify that they were competent, they could apply for a fee patent, and then they would have to pay taxes on it, then they could sell it. But during that 25-year period, it was shrouded in what was known as a trust patent. And that's what happened here at White Earth. White Earth Reservation, so the sum total of it is they lost 90 million acres, Native people nationwide, between 1887 and 1934.
Okay.
So we were left with 50 million acres of tribal trust land. Here at White Earth, how it worked, the Dawes Act was applied, but then the Nelson Act trumped it. And Knut Nelson was a Norwegian immigrant who was a federal senator, and he was heavily involved with the University of Minnesota Board of Regents, and he was also heavily involved with the lumber companies. He was an executive and a big investor, benefactor, if you will. Well, the idea was to dissolve the 5 Chippewa reservations east of us and move everyone to White Earth and Red Lake under the Dawes Act allotment. Red Lake refused allotment.
Right.
Allegedly, White Earth voted for it, so we got the refugees from Leech Lake, Mille Lacs.
That's where George came
Mille
from.
Lacs, Fond du Lac, and I'm not. It's fuzzy whether we got any Grand Portage or Net Lake people, but there are names here who are I can relate to those 2 reservations. So the long and short of it here is this reservation. Before we were White Earth, we were Gull Lake. Brainerd city limits, Pequot Lake city limits, 25 miles long, 18 miles wide. White pine and red pine.
Yeah.
1867, the Washburns, Crosbys, and Pillsburys went down and whined to Ramsey and Sibley and got them to come up, sign treaty. They signed treaty, they moved us here. Well, in the meantime, they assassinated our chief, Holnaday the Younger. That was a guy named Charles Ruffy, Indian agent, because Holnaday was a pretty smart cookie, and he started asking questions about how they could bring 1854 land scrip mixed bloods from that treaty who were disenfranchised and taken off the rolls because they took, it wasn't allotment, but they took land scrip homesteads. And then what they did is put them on the rolls at Gull Lake, and then they subsequently moved them to White Earth, and then there was, the long and short of it is, 1,200 illegals moved here and got put on the rolls here, both at Gull Lake and then White Earth.
So originally, only full-bloods could get the allotment, right?
No, full land mix got them.
Okay.
Full-bloods could not sell their allotment because they were considered mentally incompetent. So in order to be a competent, you had to show white blood. So what happened here at White Earth in 1910, they did a blood roll by an Indian agent named John Hinton. And Hinton sat down with the families with a legal pad, him and a bunch of scribes, and they asked each one, who are your people? And those old, ignorant, couldn't read and write Indians could go back 9 and 10 generations by memory. Indian names, clans, who was mixed blood, where they came from, who was full blood.
When.
And they,
And
yeah,
time,
yeah, and when. And so they have a pretty accurate record of 1,000 full-bloods were here at White Earth in 1910. Well, that creates a problem because they were allotted in 1887 and then trumped in 1889. So between 1887, 89 through 1934, they were dishing out allotments here. But you couldn't get an allotment unless you were born July 1st, 1900 or before. That's the only ones that got allotments. And I've never figured out that cutoff date. And the only reason I know, my grandma was born July 31st, 1900, and she missed it by 31 days. So she was torqued, and she outlived 2 husbands. They were both allottees, so she inherited their interest. But when they moved us here to White Earth from Gull Lake, and then the other refugees from the Nelson Act, from the other reservations, the reservation here is basically a square, 36 townships. You do the math, it comes out to 829,440 acres. Well, they didn't factor in the lakes, 45,000. So now subtract 45,000 from 829, you're down to what, 792. The long and short of it is they allotted to the children, the adults, mixed and full blood. Under the law, there was a 25-year trust on the allotment. So they got the allotment, it was a trust patent. It's supposed to sit on it 25 years, then the Indian agent could certify them competent, then they could get a fee patent, but you had to fill out an application like you fill out for your driver's license or whatever.
Right, right.
You file that with the county recorder's office. Then you pay taxes after that. What they were doing here and other reservations, they were sending force fee patents to the native people without them applying for it. And then because they didn't pay the taxes because they didn't know it was in fee status, they lost them for non-payment of taxes.
Is that like a quitclaim deed or something? Or?
It's worse. It's all of a sudden in the mail you got a fee patent. Someone else filled it out for you. And now, so your trust patent's null and void. Now you pay taxes on it. They had no clue what taxes were.
I thought you couldn't tax a native person.
But they did. It was the realty, and it went from trust status to fee.
Oh, okay, all right.
So force fee patents, and then they were sending fee patents to people in their deceased state. And then there were minor sales. There would be cases where there were orphans, and then they'd have what do you call it, like a guardian. The guardian would sell the allotment, pocket the money, and the kid was out of luck.
Mm-hmm.
So there was those cases, and then there were full-blood sales, which were illegal because under federal Indian law, full-bloods considered mentally incompetent.
Until they could vote in, what was it, 34?
24.
24, okay.
1924.
Yeah, yeah.
And then what happened, you have, then in 1913, they transferred John Hinton to Fond du Lac and bring in an attorney named Ransom J. Powell, who's an attorney and retainer with the lumber companies. And he redoes the 1910 roll and makes 900 full-bloods, mixed bloods. Now they can sell their timber and their land. So that went to court in 1920, Page Morris's court in Fergus Falls, Minnesota. Page Morris was a previous attorney for lumber companies and former federal senator and involved with the lumber companies. And he ruled that the official blood roll for White Earth is the 1913 roll, and this was in October of 1920. So for timber and land purposes, the 1920 roll is the official roll. For the sake of enrollment, the Hinton roll is to be used, but interchangeably, Minnesota Chippewa Tribe, BI, Indian Health Service, White Earth Band have interchangeably used both blood rolls. So everyone's blood is essentially in error and convoluted. So,
And that blood quantum was established by the University of Minnesota, right?
well, they brought in Dr. Albert Jenks from St. Paul campus. He was a full-blood expert anthropologist, and Dr. Ailes Herdlicka. And this was Powell's expert witnesses on certifying these full-bloods. But what they did is measured their feet, and they said they could tell the size of the feet, full blood from a mixed blood. They examined hair samples and how curly or straight your hair, they could tell a mix from a full blood. Then they had a continuum of civilization by blood or pigmentation of your skin. The darker you are, the closer you are to monkeys and animals. The lighter you are, the closer you are to civilization. And they had that index. And then they measured with calipers the craniums, because the theory at that time in science was the larger the cranium, the more gray matter, thus the more intelligence. Well, they threw that index out here at White Earth under that study because statistically we Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, Chippewa people have larger craniums than the rest of civilization for some reason. And what they did, their ultimate test was to take their fingernail and scratch us on the chest here, and then how fast the blood came to the surface of the skin, they could tell a mix from a full blood.
That was scientific.
And well, this is what they used in federal court, and it's still law today. And the long and short of it is this: by June 18, 1934, stopping allotment, freezing everything into trust, the White Earth Reservation controlled 810 acres of the original 829,440 acres. Now today in 2009, we control about 76,000 acres. But over the years, we've had to purchase back lands under what was called the Revolving Loan Fund of the Indian Reservations Act of 1934. And then the tribe has bought back land, and then we got 10,000 acres back from the state, but only 5,000 has been transferred because the other 5,000, every time they go to clear title, there's clouded title. So.
And Winona's doing some work too. To do
Land
some,
recovery,
yeah.
but her land is held in a land trust. That's not federal trust or band trust, and so that's kind of a sore point with the tribal council. But it's a good thing because the people still can use it, and it's not taxed. But there were full blood sales, and then there was the hocus pocus blood roll. And then Ransom J. Paul, it was a known fact, he was an attorney with the lumber companies. Then they passed a law in 1889, a nationwide law like the Dawes Act, called the Dead and Down Timber Act. And what that law did, I contend we lost 90% plus of our timber here at White Earth, Red Lake, Leech Lake, Mille Lacs, Fond du Lac, Nut Lake, Grand Port, all of them. It said anytime there's fire damaged timber on a reservation, a lumber company may cut that timber for 1,000 board feet, which was 1,000 feet long, a foot wide, an inch thick, for 75 cents. And then of that transaction, 25 cents went to the BIA for administrative costs and 50 cents went to the individual Indian or the tribe. But they wouldn't pay the tribe or the individual Indian because under federal Indian law, we are wards of the government, and if you look up wards in Webster's, it means incompetent. So they put it in the infamous IIM account in Washington, the individual Indian money account, which is now the Cobell case where Eloise Cobell, the Blackfoot elder from Montana, sued in 1996, and it's still pending now, 13 years later. So according to her and her attorneys, the feds owe Native people under that class action suit, under land and resources, from 1887 till the present, about $37 billion. The feds are saying, no, it's only $8 billion, and so they're kind of in a negotiation phase. And twice the Secretary of Interior has been found in contempt The Bureau has shredded and destroyed records. And all of this stuff, the origin of it is from the Vatican, papal bulls, which essentially said these popes back in the 14th and 15th century, specifically that time era.
About the time Columbus came over.
Right, and that's what he used. They see the Pope copped a deal with Isabella and Ferdinand. And Columbus carried it out. And what he said, if you find stuff, we'll split the difference. So what it was is it basically said when good Christian nations encounter and find heathen, savage, pagan nations who don't believe in the true God of the Bible, it is incumbent on the discoverer and the monarchs to subjugate those people, enslave them, kill them, and seize their resources if they don't convert to the true God of the Bible. So these papal bulls are the foundation of federal Indian law. They still cite it in federal court, these papal bulls. And then out of the papal bulls came the doctrine of discovery, which said, we discovered you and yours, therefore they're ours because we're the supreme sovereign, based on the papal bulls. And the doctrine of conquest, we conquered you, therefore you and yours are ours. That's the foundation of federal Indian law, and it's still law today. They still cite it in federal court cases in 2009.
You're kidding me.
I'm not kidding. It's the origin of the problem is the papal bulls and the doctrine of discovery and the doctrine of conquest.
Now, Dr. Roxanne Gould's a friend of mine, and I
Yeah.
think she did her doctoral work on imperialism and indigenous people. And she was just over for salmon the other night, and she and Jim Rock, and she said that there was a sort of a divvying up of the Earth, the planet, at one point in time, and that that this was a worldwide strategy
Yeah.
for dividing up the world.
And the Catholic Church has refused as recent as Pope Benedict.
Which was just
Recent.
before Pius XII.
No, he's right now the present
Oh.
Pope, Benedict.
Oh, okay. I thought there was one before.
Well, no, all the popes have refused to rescind these papal bulls.
And Benedict did too.
He refused to. And how that works, there's God, Jesus, then the Pope.
Right.
And because the Pope said so, in the direct line of God and Jesus and the Pope, it's law. And our country, the United States, has adopted the papal bulls and the doctrine of discovery and conquest as the foundation of federal Indian law. There's 5,000 plus laws that apply to natives that don't apply to anyone else that are citizens.
Oh, Andy.
Yeah, it's red apartheid. We dismantled apartheid in South Africa, and we have this U.S. federal trust system based on the papal bulls and the doctrine of discovery and conquest. You know, we shouldn't point fingers at anyone else in the world. And the U.S. Refuses to. I think they just had a vote on the human rights for indigenous people. The U.S., Canada, Australia, and New Zealand.
Probably Japan in there
No,
too.
refused to vote in favor of that because of the large indigenous populations. And we only have NGO status at the United Nations, non-governmental organization. They don't they recognize us as a quasi-sovereign, and that was from a Supreme Court ruling from John Marshall in 1830s.
The Marshall
Trilogy. Mm-hmm. So this stuff is all related, and we're still living with the effects of it now. We are essentially landless. What land we have is either hilly, rocky, or swampy.
Peat bogs. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so we need land, and land is our lifeblood. And so we have a lot of poverty. Even with the casino, we have still about 50% poverty here at Waiters in 2009. Before the casino, it was like 80-90% unemployment. So things are getting better. There's hope. And then we have the tribal college, and the White Earth Band is the largest employer in northern Minnesota. And we have like 1,900 employees, tribal ops, tribal college, housing, and the casino. Casino alone,
I heard the wild rice.
1,100. Oh, there's rice, all kinds
Yeah, I
of
heard
rice.
there's surplus. There's like 40 or between 40 and 80,000 tons of surplus of wild rice that can't be processed because there aren't enough processors.
They off of Big Rice Lake alone annually, they take 300,000 pounds.
Wow.
And I just talked to one of my buddies this morning. Yesterday, they came off the lake with 700 pounds. That's from one day.
But they don't have the processors to handle it, right?
Well, they're scrambling.
Yeah.
There's a few.
I saw
A lot of them do it the old way, and then
Do they
it
still?
increases the value.
Yeah. I saw Denny, Dennis his
Yeah.
gun was up at Red Lake for that workshop, and he said that that it's molding because there isn't enough processing available to do it. So
Yeah.
they're like giving it away.
The processors are working pretty much 24/7.
So there is some employment there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this guy said him and his partner have harvested this racing season just shy of 7,000 pounds. Wow. And if they're selling it at $2 a pound, that's 14 grand for about 2 weeks' work.
Yeah.
Which is great. I mean, school clothes and maybe a good used pickup and catch up on the bills. And
Yeah, yeah. Now, there's a thing that, as long as we're on wild rice, it's not part of the land allotment thing, but Winona's working on also keeping the wild rice pure, right?
Right.
Because there's been a lot of genetic
Altering
of the wild rice, primarily from like California.
University of Minnesota.
Oh, really? Tell me about that.
It's the U. And 25 paddy rice growers are funding it. And they're business people. I can understand their position, but if that paddy rice cross-pollinates with natural wild rice, it'll kill off the natural stand in about 3 years.
And how close is that to affecting like big rice and?
Well, if there's enough of it cross-pollinating, it'll affect it.
No, but I mean, how close are the genetically
Paddies?
altered? Yeah, altered.
There's some north of there, up in Clearwater County.
Really, that close, huh?
Yeah, and that they're not real close, but I'd say probably about 25, 30 miles away.
That's just a matter of time then, really.
Yeah. So we need to keep the wild rice pure, and what Winona is doing is good. We need to get the land back, and the tribe is buying land back too. So, and then there's been several executive orders that were done in the 1930s that we're supposed to transfer back 70,000 acres, and we're working on that now too. The tribe is.
Great.
So.
So can you personalize this a little bit?
Sure.
The book, if I remember the dates correctly, is somewhere around 1912 to about 1920, 1919 or somewhere around there. And it's about, well, you know what it's about, but it's about basically a family that loses their home on Lake Machi-Manitou, right? Anyway, does that sound right? Machi-Manitou, yeah. And I'm just wondering if you can share some personal experiences with, relatives or friends that lost land.
Virtually every family did, because we lost 99% of the land base. And so that's why over 3/4 of the tribal White Earth population lives elsewhere. There's more White Earth enrollees in the Twin Cities than there are on the reservation. There was no work here because of the land-based problem. And virtually every family was affected. And I asked my grandparents about it, and they said, we were starving. You had to sell timber, you had to sell land, And then once first the fur industry bottomed out, then the timber industry bottomed out, and then...
Because it was depleted, right?
It was depleted, and then people just moved, and then 1953 was the Indian Relocation Program.
Right. George was in that.
Yeah, and you know who operated that for the feds? His name was Dylan S. Myers. He's the guy who ran the Japanese internment camps. And 50% of 18 to 35-year-old Native men were removed from the reservation areas to 10 urban industrial cities.
George was on his way with his wife to Cleveland, Ohio.
Yeah, that was one of the sites.
And,
Chicago, Cleveland, Detroit,
yeah.
L.A., Denver, and, Minneapolis, St. Paul.
Yep. And George was on his way to Cleveland, and I think got to Minneapolis with his wife, and they found out that his wife was pregnant, and they took him off the program. He ended up in Minneapolis with his wife, pregnant wife, and nothing. Absolutely nothing.
Well, the relocation program, it's still operational today. And basically what it was and is a one-way bus ticket to one of those 10 industrial cities. And 2 weeks I call cheap chow mein money and cheap motel money. And that's it. And they have the gall to call it a jobs and training program.
So there's no guarantee of any job.
Nope.
And
it's a farce. It's a typical BIA farce.
Is that what I was seeing in grade school when we would come down from St. Cloud to Minneapolis, and the bus would go down Washington Avenue?
Most of the people who were there were either got there under relocation, or they were the World War II and Korea moved a lot of people off the reservation because the soldiers went to war, and then the women went to work in the defense plants. Ignatia Broker, who wrote that book, she was one of the Rosie the Riveters down in Twin Cities. I don't know if she worked for FMC there or
what, like Arden Hills or something.
No, probably FMC, where they built the big guns and tanks and turrets and stuff.
So to bring it up to again to the personal level.
Well, my grandparents moved to the cities in 1925, and I asked them why. Why'd you move down there? And they said, Andrew, there was no work. We were starving. We were living off of partridges and deer and fish and rice. I mean, granted, we were eating, but if any of those failed, we starved.
Yeah, there's a story in the book about the old man eating gopher.
Sure. And so my grandma was a domestic. She cleaned wealthy white people's houses on River Road, West and East River Road, out by the Mississippi, up and down from the Franklin Avenue Bridge there. And then my grandpa worked for those cedar creosote pole dipping yards on about 27th and University out by the railroad tracks there. He retired out of there.
I used to live over there.
Yeah. So
that's a good healthy job.
Yeah, creosote. So then my mom was raised down there, and my uncle, and then my other grandparents' siblings were down there. And his one brother came home after the war and just stayed. He was on Washington Avenue, and then my grandma's sisters basically moved to Chicago under relocation, and so consequently I've got like 300 cousins in Chicago from my grandma's two sisters, and her brother settled in Minneapolis, and
So your grandparents were full blood?
No, they were both half.
Oh, okay.
My grandpa was a Jourdain, so my grandma became a Jourdain. She was a Jandrew, and her mother was a Strong, and then my mother was a Jourdain. So I've got Red Lake Jourdain blood, White Earth Strong blood, and then Yankton Sioux blood from my grandpa's dad.
Was that Santee? No, it's
Yankton, Yanktoni or Lake Andes or.
And that's Lakota, isn't it?
Nakota. They call the Yanktons.
Okay. I didn't think that happened until up closer to North Dakota, but.
No, well, there are some up there, Yanktonis, which is a branch of the Yanktons, way up on, I think that's what Fort Peck and them are, in
Oh, okay.
Oahe up that way.
Yeah, I just met some women from there.
Yeah.
Is there anything? Well, now, can you help me and George out a little? George and I out a little bit. George was just telling me a story. It's on the end of this tape, or the beginning of this tape, that he recently got, say, within the last 10 years, got an order from a judge that they were going to. They needed to come in and sign some papers to sell their land.
That was probably probate papers.
And he says
They're
it still
still
hasn't
doing-
been settled.
But
He
they're
has-
still doing probates. They're doing probates every day out of Fort Snelling. See, where the government blew it, they weren't doing probates on those.
Explain probate for us.
Someone dies,
Oh.
so you probate the property. So those old Indians were dying, and so they didn't do probate, so they don't know who the heirs are. So they're doing probates every day as we speak right now out at Fort Snelling. They're doing a probate. They're doing nothing but white earth probates every day.
On
Monday through
Indian
Friday.
land.
Yep.
I mean, the probates are about Indian
Yeah.
land. Yeah. So, is there anything George can do to find the? He says that the judge won't even tell him where the land is.
Well, he's probably got papers. If I were George, I would go to the bureau, and it was probably his grandma or his grandpa, unless his grandparents again were born before 1900. See,
Well, Wawewickamik was.
Right.
Wawewickamik was.
right?
Yeah.
But then, under probate, all of the heirs, every time someone dies, it multiplies geometrically almost. Some parcels, there's 400, 800, 1,200 heirs. So then when they figure out the proceeds, each person would probably receive a check for about 4 cents. Well, it's that silly.
No, I just heard somebody got a check for 36 cents
Yep.
up in.
And then the stamp and the envelope in the stationery would be more
More.
than what it's worth.
So that's how George has got land.
It's
Supposedly
probably it's either his parents or grandparents. Now it could be Mille Lacs because they were Mille Lacs removals.
Right. He said there's land in Mille Lacs.
Yep.
And then his family was removed from Mille Lacs
To here,
to here.
right? They settled out at Elbow Lake.
Right. And you could see the foundation for
Yeah.
for the old property
Yeah.
right there. But the judge will not tell him where the land is.
He can look that up. If he goes into the White Earth Land Office, they'll help him.
Really?
But he has to have those old people's names. Yeah, have him come, bring him down sometime. We'll work
All
with
right.
him.
And
That's a good walleye lake.
is it?
Oh God.
Where?
Well, I haven't fished it since 52.
Really?
That was the last time, or 1955, we were up there.
Yeah. So sometime I should bring George over here and we'll go through the records. Huh?
Yep.
How come? Why won't the judge tell him?
The judge probably doesn't know. He got his name. He was told to deal with it. He dealt with it. And he probably doesn't even know the legals.
But somebody is taking action.
It's a probate. They want to clear the record.
Who's they? The
Feds.
Okay.
I bet it come out of Fort Snelling.
Okay.
Ask him. I bet you anything. It's a federal judge.
Okay.
Frederick Lambrick is his name.